She was wearing an aqua cover-up, a royal blue headscarf, and a pink Apple Watch when she walked out alive. 7 weeks later, federal divers are on their hands and knees on the floor of an abandoned harbor in the Bahamas, scanning the dark water with underwater cameras, while a cadaver dog works a remote beach that almost no one has ever searched. And what they found on that beach today is the kind of discovery that makes investigators go very, very quiet. The man who was supposed to find her came home without her. And now his own GPS data is leading investigators directly to the places he swore he had never been. Before we go any further, I need to warn you. This case involves alleged domestic violence, suspected murder, and details that are deeply disturbing. If that is not something you are in a place to hear today, please take care of yourself first. For everyone staying with me, welcome to Kieran Wilson. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because this is not a story you want to miss a single update on. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from. And if this video moves you, please like, share, and help us get Lynette's story in front of as many eyes as possible. Let's get into it. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old, a mother, a sailor, and by every account from the people who knew her, someone who was fully alive in whatever she was doing. She was not the kind of person who sat still. She sewed the canvas window coverings on the couple's sailboat, the Soulmate, with her own hands. She documented the life she and her husband were building on the water through social media, sharing clips of sea turtles gliding beneath the surface, narrow island channels, and the kind of open horizon freedom that most people only talk about. She had a daughter named Carly Aylesworth and a mother named Darlene Hamlet back in Michigan who loved her completely. Those two women are a central part of everything that follows in this story. Her husband, Brian Hooker, was 59 years old. The couple had been married for approximately 25 years and had spent the later chapter of their lives chasing a retirement dream on the water. Brian ran a communications business in Michigan called Hooker Communications LLC before the sailing life took over. By April 2026, the Soulmate was their home, and the Bahamas was where they had taken it. In the first days of April 2026, Brian and Lynette were in the Abacos, a chain of islands in the northern Bahamas, known for calm, protected waters, small communities, and a sailing culture that draws Americans every season. They had been moving between anchorages, refilling scuba tanks, exploring by dinghy, and building the kind of daily rhythm that long-term sailors fall into. They had dinner at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown on the evening of April 4th. That was the last time anyone outside of Brian Hooker saw Lynette alive. She was wearing an aqua bathing suit cover-up, a royal blue Conch Republic headscarf, and a powder pink Apple Watch. According to Bahamian officials, the couple left the Abaco Inn at approximately 7:30 in the evening, 4 minutes after sunset, boarding their small 8-foot dinghy to travel back to the Soulmate, anchored near Elbow Cay. What happened next is Brian Hooker's account, and it is the only account that exists from that night. He told Bahamian authorities that as they were traveling from Hopetown toward Elbow Cay, conditions deteriorated rapidly. He said the waters near Aunt Pat's Bay became rough, and at some point, Lynette went overboard. He told investigators she went into the water with the engine ignition key, cutting off their only means of power. He said he threw a flotation device toward her and last saw her swimming in the direction of shore. Without engine power and unable to reach her, he says he paddled the dinghy for hours in the dark before the vessel eventually drifted and washed ashore near the Marsh Harbor boat yard, where he arrived at approximately 3:35 in the morning on April 5th. He told someone at the boatyard what had happened. That person then contacted police. What did not happen next is just as important. Brian Hooker did not call Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, until approximately 14 hours after Lynette disappeared. He did not call Carly. Bahamian authorities launched a search based entirely on the geography Brian gave them, focusing on the area near Aunt Pat's Bay and Elbow Cay. That search found nothing, and as investigators would later confirm to U.S. officials, the area they searched was the wrong area entirely. The first call Carly Aylesworth got about her mother came on Sunday evening, April 5th, somewhere between 8 and 8:30 at night. That is already notable. Lynette had been missing since the previous evening. Brian Hooker did not call her daughter until the following night. When he did call, Carly told CNN that he delivered the news matter-of-factly. His exact words, as she recalled them, were, "Your mum is missing. We don't know where she is. She's been missing since last night, but we're going to come up there soon to see you." Then he kept talking briefly and abruptly ended the call. Carly said she was in shock, not just at the news, but at his tone. She described it to the Today Show as monotone and relaxed. Her boyfriend, Steve Hansen, who was present, said the same thing independently. That flatness in delivery was the first thing that did not sit right with Carly. The second thing was the key. Brian told authorities that Lynette fell overboard, holding the engine's ignition key, also described as a safety lanyard, which cut power to the dinghy the moment it left his wrist or hers. Carly told CBS News she did not understand how Lynette had the key, because Brian was always the one driving the dinghy. She said plainly, "Brian's always driving, so he basically is in charge of the key." That detail alone raised an immediate question that investigators would not stop asking. But this is not where the questions started. The history of this relationship stretched back years, and it was documented. In December 2005, Kentwood, Michigan police documented a child abuse investigation under complaint number 19919-05, naming Brian Hooker as the alleged perpetrator, referring the matter to the Michigan Family Independence Agency. The records obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request showed nearly 40 pages of police documents in Kentwood dating back to that same year. Then in February 2015, a domestic incident at the couple's Kentwood home ended with Lynette spending a night in county jail. Police found Brian with a swollen, bloody nose. He told officers his wife had struck him in the face multiple times. Lynette told police Brian had hit her in the forehead, though no visible injuries on her were documented at the scene. The warrant against Lynette was ultimately denied on insufficient evidence as to who started the assault. Both gave conflicting accounts. Only one of them went to jail that night, and it was not Brian. What Carly told investigators went beyond any single incident. She stated that Brian had choked Lynette and made threatening statements in the aftermath of that physical violence. Darlene Hamlet confirmed to News Nation that her daughter had left Brian multiple times following episodes of abuse, that Lynette took photographs of her injuries as personal reminders not to return, and that despite that, she kept going back. Darlene described Brian as capable of being mean and physical when he drank. She also told reporters that Lynette had booked a plane ticket approximately 1 month before she disappeared to come home, and that Lynette had confided in a friend that she was scared of being at sea, alone with Brian. In the weeks before the April trip, Darlene had already been calling battered women's shelters, not for crisis intervention, but to find a more persuasive argument, a better strategy to convince her daughter to leave and stay gone. That is the weight of what this family was carrying before April 4th ever arrived. If any part of this story is making you want to follow every update as this investigation moves forward, hit subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. This case is still developing and you do not want to miss what comes next. On April 8th, 4 days after Lynette disappeared, the Royal Bahamas Police Force took Brian Hooker into custody in Marsh Harbour for questioning. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell A. Butler, confirmed the arrest and stated that Brian had not been charged with a crime and that he was cooperating with authorities. Butler added that her client categorically and unequivocally denied any wrongdoing. Brian was held for 5 days. On April 13th, the Royal Bahamas Police Force released him after the Department of Public Prosecution recommended that no charges be filed at that time, pending the outcome of further investigation. The decision came down to a legal deadline, and when that deadline passed without charges being laid, Brian Hooker walked out of the Central Police Station in Freeport a free man. The following day, April 14th, Brian gave an interview to ABC News. He said his sole focus was finding Lynette. He said he would not leave the Bahamas until he found her. He said, and these were his words, that he was going to keep going and that he was not leaving until told to leave or convinced it was fruitless. Hours after that interview aired, Brian Hooker boarded a flight back to Michigan. His attorney cited the need to be with his terminally ill mother. He has not returned to the Bahamas since. That is when the Coast Guard Investigative Service, known as CGIS, formally stepped in as the lead federal agency on this case. CGIS holds jurisdiction over crimes involving U.S.-flagged vessels and U.S. nationals on the water. The FBI was brought in as a supporting agency, processing physical evidence at its laboratory facility in Quantico, Virginia. Investigators also began examining technology found aboard the Soulmate, including an infrared camera, to determine whether it held evidence relevant to the night of April 4th. Between May 8th and May 10th, the CGIS executed what they described as a complex surveillance and interdiction operation, seizing the Soulmate approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida. The vessel was taken to Coast Guard Station Fort Pierce and later moved to Fort Lauderdale. When investigators processed the boat, they catalogued what was missing. Among the absent items, scuba diving equipment, a weight belt, a torpedo motor, an anchor, and a bright neon green dry bag that Lynette was known to carry and that should have been highly visible if it had entered the water. And then the data came back. Brian had been using a marine navigation app on his phone the night Lynette disappeared. When investigators extracted the GPS data from that device, what they found did not match the geography he had given authorities from day one. The data showed the device moving out onto the water, stopping at a specific location in the Sea of Abaco, and then returning. That movement pattern placed him in areas that had never been searched because he had never told anyone he had been there. A U.S. official confirmed to multiple news outlets that Brian's account had caused investigators to search in the wrong area entirely. That single piece of data reset the entire investigation. But the phone was not the only device talking. Marine tracking data obtained through Vessel Finder, a commercial vessel tracking service, showed that the Soulmate's automatic identification system, known as AIS, went dark at 9:29 in the evening on April 4th and did not resume transmitting until 8:40 the following morning. That is a blackout of more than 11 hours. AIS is a system that continuously broadcasts a vessel's identity, speed, and position to other boats and to maritime authorities. Kenneth Engerand, an adjunct professor of maritime law at the University of Houston Law Center, told Fox News Digital that the timing was highly unusual, stating that AIS does not simply stop and restart on its own. He said the ways it can go dark are limited: catastrophic power failure, physical destruction, or someone turning it off deliberately. The Soulmate suffered no known catastrophic failure that night. It was turned off, and it came back on the next morning. Investigators were also examining Brian's search history on the Gemini AI platform, which reportedly contained searches relevant to the circumstances surrounding Lynette's disappearance, including the limitations of cadaver detection and island waste disposal methods. Every digital trail Brian Hooker left behind was pointing investigators in a direction his words had tried to close off. That is not where everything ended. That is precisely where this case began to accelerate. Brian and Lynette Hooker had been in the Abacos for weeks before April 4th. They were not tourists moving through on a schedule. They were live-aboard sailors who had settled into the rhythms of the islands, moving between anchorages, exploring by dinghy, and covering ground that most visitors never reach. They paddleboarded in Marsh Harbor. They navigated the mangrove channels near the mooring ball off Canchi Joe's restaurant, the kind of tight, shallow passages that require local knowledge to move through without getting turned around. They visited Snapper Point, an area featuring an abandoned marina that Carly herself had explored alongside Brian and Lynette during a visit. They reached the secluded western beaches of Lubbock's Quarters, the quiet, largely undeveloped coastline on the western side of the cay that sits directly across the Sea of Abaco from Marsh Harbor. These were not places marked on a tourist map. These were places that take time, curiosity, and repeated trips to find. That history matters enormously to the investigators now working this case because it changes the entire meaning of what the GPS data shows. When Brian Hooker got into that dinghy on the night of April 4th, he was not navigating unfamiliar water in the dark. He had been to these places in daylight. He knew the channels, the depths, the access points, and the isolation levels of specific stretches of coastline. The question investigators are now answering is not whether he could have reached these locations in the dark. It is whether the GPS data shows that he did. And the data shows circling. There is a meaningful difference between a device drifting across open water and a device that stops moving forward and begins circling at a fixed location. Drifting is passive. Circling is purposeful. It is the same behavioral marker you would see if someone stopped a car in a specific spot, rather than rolling past it. You stop and circle in a place because you know what is there, or because you are doing something at that location that requires you to stay. The CGIS identified multiple GPS circles in the data extracted from Brian's devices, each connected to a specific geography in the Sea of Abaco. 3 locations were built into the search plan before the Margaret Norvell ever left Florida. The first was an abandoned harbor north of Witch Point, on the eastern shore of Marsh Harbor. It is a man-made basin, enclosed on multiple sides, deeper than the surrounding Sea of Abaco, and sitting directly adjacent to the area where the dinghy was eventually recovered. A remote location that someone in a small, quiet boat could reach in the dark with prior knowledge of the coastline. The second was the northwest side of Lubbock's Quarters, the secluded western beaches that Brian and Lynette had visited together during their weeks in the Abacos. That stretch of coastline had not been covered in the original search because the original search was built on Brian's account of events, which placed everything near Aunt Pat's Bay and Elbow Cay. These beaches are in a completely different geography. The third location was Tilu Cut, a passage on the southeastern edge of the Sea of Abaco, where water depths reach approximately 40 feet in a specific pocket within the cut. That depth makes it invisible to aerial searches. The basin tide in that area turns from flood to ebb between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in the evening, which falls directly within the window of the night Lynette disappeared. Carly's theory connects directly to what is missing from the Soulmate. She believes Lynette was taken into the water, weighted down by the scuba equipment and the weight belt that are no longer on the boat. She believes the torpedo motor, also missing, was used to move the dinghy quietly and without engine noise through the dark. These are not random missing items. They are the specific items that would be needed to do what Carly believes was done. And then there is the bright neon green dry bag. It is waterproof. It is buoyant. If it had entered the Sea of Abaco and floated freely, it would have appeared somewhere along the extensively searched shorelines that volunteers and investigators have covered over 7 weeks. It has not been found anywhere, not in the water, not on the shore. Carly's theory is that it went into the Bahamian waste stream. On islands where trash is frequently burned rather than collected, items that enter that stream do not resurface. If that bag was disposed of through that method, it is gone. And the fact that something that visible, that buoyant, and that identifiable simply does not exist anywhere in the search area is a detail that sits at the center of this investigation. On June 3, 2026, the USCG Margaret Norvell, hull designation WPC-1105, a 154-foot Sentinel-class cutter, arrived in the northern Abacos and positioned itself off the coast of Elbow Cay. The vessel draws 9.5 feet of draft, which means it cannot operate in the shallower stretches of the Sea of Abaco, where the searching needed to happen. Positioning off Elbow Cay gave the cutter access to the deep water channel it required, while placing it within fast boat range of every identified search location. What happened next was not a gradual transition from travel to operations. The rigid hull inflatable boat, the RIB, was in the water and loaded before the Margaret Norvell had fully settled into position. Teams were moving within 1 hour of arrival. Federal agencies do not deploy that way when they are running a general search. They deploy that way when every target location, every team assignment, and every piece of equipment needed for each site has been locked into the plan days before the vessel left port. 3 simultaneous search efforts launched from that single deployment. The first sent the remotely operated underwater vehicle dive team to the abandoned harbor north of Witch Point on the eastern shore of Marsh Harbor, the man-made enclosed basin identified in the GPS data as a key location. That team worked the floor of that basin with the underwater vehicle through the full stretch of available daylight. The second sent Maggie, the cadaver K9, from the Broward County Sheriff's Office to the northwest shore of Lubber's Quarters, alongside her handler. This was Maggie's second deployment to these waters. The first time she was here, the search was structured around what Brian Hooker said happened. This time, she was working coordinates pulled directly from his GPS data, covering ground that the original search never touched because the original search was never designed to go there. The third team was photographed and confirmed entering Tilu Cut, the southern passage where investigators have identified a 40-foot deep water pocket that aerial searches could not reach. Operating alongside the CGIS teams that day was a vessel from the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, confirmed by observers as one of the boats that had worked these waters during the initial search in April. The two-country coordination on a single morning from the same operational window is not something that comes together quickly. It requires weeks of relationship building, shared intelligence, and mutual agreement on jurisdiction and procedure. The fact that it happened on day one of this deployment reflects how far this investigation had progressed behind the scenes before the Margaret Norvell ever crossed the Florida Straits. And then this. During the land search on the northwest shore of Lubbock's Quarters, while Maggie was working that coastline, a local individual found an article of clothing in the area being covered. The item was aqua in color, matching the description of the bathing suit cover-up that Lynette Hooker was wearing when she left the Abaco Inn on the evening of April 4th. The person who found it did not hold on to it. They turned it over to Coast Guard investigators immediately and provided the exact coordinates of where it was recovered. That item is now in federal evidence. The forensic comparison between the garment and Lynette Hooker has not yet been publicly confirmed, but the location where it was found sits directly within the geography that Brian Hooker's GPS data places him near on the night she disappeared. That connection is not incidental. If you are watching this case for the first time and want to follow every development as it happens, subscribe to Kieran Wilson right now and hit the notification bell. This investigation is still active, and the next update could come at any moment. There is still one more piece of physical evidence that has not yet been fully processed. The 8-foot dinghy that Brian says he and Lynette were aboard on the night of April 4th was seized by Coast Guard investigators from Bahamian impound on June 4th. Photos captured the moment a CGIS investigator boarded the vessel and was seen surveying it, holding up a life jacket. A cadaver dog was present during the seizure. The dinghy is now in federal custody and will undergo full forensic processing. What investigators are specifically looking for requires understanding one biological fact. Approximately 3 hours after death, a body begins emitting volatile organic compounds that a trained cadaver dog can detect. If Lynette Hooker was in that dinghy at any point after her death, trace evidence of that presence may have transferred to the hull, the floor, or the motor mount. 7 weeks of Bahamian rain may have weakened some of that evidence. Forensic science suggests it cannot eliminate it entirely. The teams on the water worked through every minute of available daylight on day one, and the RIB brought them back to the dock in full darkness. Not because they were finished, because the light was gone. The following morning at 8:30, they were back on the water at a second specific Marsh Harbor location that had been built into the operational plan before the Margaret Norvell left Florida. The Soulmate, meanwhile, had already been relocated from Fort Pierce to Coast Guard Station, Fort Lauderdale, where it will continue to be processed for evidence as investigators described it as the subject of a possible murder investigation. 2 countries, multiple agencies, 7 weeks of preparation, and an operation that did not stop until the darkness made it stop. A U.S. official confirmed to CBS News that the disappearance of Lynette Hooker is now being investigated as a possible foreign murder of a U.S. national. That is the official framing of this case as it stands today, not a missing person search, not an accidental drowning inquiry, a possible murder. That shift in classification changes everything about what investigators are building toward and what the evidence they are collecting is designed to support. Brian Hooker is back in Michigan. He has not been charged with any crime. After returning from the Bahamas, he retained Grand Rapids-based attorney Crystal Marie Hauser to represent him domestically, a person who hires legal representation before any charges have been filed. And while a federal criminal investigation is actively running in another country, is not someone operating with confidence that the matter is resolved. That preparation tells its own story. The evidence assembled over the past 7 weeks does not rest on any single item. It is a cumulative picture. GPS circles from a marine navigation app that show the dinghy stopping at specific locations Brian never disclosed. An 11-hour AIS blackout on the Soulmate beginning at 9:29 on the night of April 4th. A backup Garmin watch recovered from the vessel that logged independent movement data. Missing inventory from the Soulmate, including scuba equipment, a weight belt, a torpedo motor, an anchor, and a neon green dry bag. 14 hours of silence before Darlene Hamlet was notified her daughter was gone. An article of clothing matching Lynette's aqua cover-up recovered from the northwest shore of Lubber's Quarters, now in federal evidence. Every item on that list was generated, either directly or indirectly, by Brian Hooker's own actions and choices. None of it was fabricated by investigators. All of it exists because of what he did or did not do. The DNA piece is already in place. Carly Aylesworth provided a mouth swab sample to the Coast Guard. Lynette's parents also provided samples. That biological reference material has been in federal custody for weeks, collected specifically for the moment when investigators need to confirm an identification in the field. It does not need to be gathered when that moment comes. It is already waiting. Carly Aylesworth told ABC News that she is grateful the Coast Guard came back with real equipment, real divers, and a real operational plan. She said, and these are her words, that her mother has to be somewhere, and that all the help they can get is greatly appreciated. That is not the statement of someone who is running on blind hope. Carly has been watching this investigation build from the outside for 2 months. She has seen CGIS take the lead. She has watched them request and receive Bahamian cooperation. She has seen the Margaret Norville arrive, and she has submitted her own DNA, knowing exactly what it will eventually be used for. Her trust in the investigation is grounded in what she has watched it become. Lynette's friend, Marnie Stevenson, who communicated with both Brian and Lynette during the Bahamas trip, told News Nation that hope is never lost in her mind until a body is found, and urged people to let CGIS work without interference so the answers can come. Darlene Hamlet, Lynette's mother, has told reporters that authorities have not kept her fully updated and that she has had no contact with Brian Hooker since before her daughter disappeared. She told the Associated Press in the early days of the investigation that her family grew up on the water, that Lynette had spent her entire life around lakes, boats, sailing, and swimming. That detail has never left the public record, and it has never stopped mattering. The woman, Brian says, simply fell off an 8-foot dinghy in a short stretch of calm to choppy water, was an experienced sailor who had lived on a boat for years. Darlene is now in Michigan, processing this through counseling, waiting for a resolution that the people who loved Lynette have been working toward every single day since April 5th. The operational schedule still has work to complete. The 4-day search deployment is still running. The second specific Marsh Harbor location identified from GPS data is on the schedule. The dinghy is now in federal custody and awaiting cadaver dog examination. The Soulmate is at Coast Guard Station Fort Lauderdale, being processed as evidence in a possible murder case. Former prosecutor Tad DiBiase, a specialist in no-body homicide cases and author of a legal guide on exactly this kind of prosecution, told News Nation that cases like this can and do go to trial without a body if the circumstantial evidence is strong enough. The GPS contradictions alone, he said, establish probable cause. What the current search operation is building is the physical confirmation that takes this from probable cause to a prosecutable case. The sequence from here is straightforward. A K9 alert at a specific GPS coordinate. A dive team going down at that location. A remotely operated vehicle providing visual confirmation simultaneously. Federal agents on standby with documentation equipment and chain of custody protocols already in place. And DNA already collected from Carly, Darlene, and Lynette's parents, ready to confirm identification the moment it is needed. That sequence is not hypothetical. It is what this deployment was designed to execute. Lynette Hooker sewed the canvas windows on the Soulmate with her own hands. She posted videos of sea turtles from below the surface. She communicated with her friends Blaine and Marnie about the next anchorage, the new engine, and the waters she was navigating. She was 55 years old, fully alive, and completely herself when she walked out of the Abaco Inn on the evening of April 4th. The waters she loved are now the center of a federal criminal investigation. And the people who loved her most, Carly, Darlene, and Lynette's parents, are waiting for the call that brings her home. If you were in the Abacos on or after April 4th and saw or found anything that connects to this case, contact the Coast Guard Investigative Service directly. The CGIS Tips app is available for download, and tips submitted through it are completely anonymous. A reward remains available for information that advances this investigation. If this story matters to you, and you want to follow every update as this case moves toward its conclusion, subscribe to Kieran Wilson right now, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Like this video and share it. Lynette Hooker deserves to be found, and the people searching for her deserve every set of eyes that can help make that happen.